Perfect. Thank you very much. The Redeemer School of Business continues Redeemer's long tradition of quality and integrity in post-secondary business education. The new BBA degrees will be immediately recognized by employers, graduate schools, professional associations. They also just better reflect the education that we provide. We'd like to kick off tonight's launch by premiering a 4-minute video that is just hot off the press. At the Redeemer School of Business, we believe faith and business go hand in hand. So they're not antithetical to one another, they actually fit together very well. So what that means is from the outset, when you're thinking about the purposes of your business, you want to think about how is this going to help transform the world for Christ. So we see profit not as an end goal for the business, but as a means to the end. And the end goals that we're driving for are meaningful products and services, good jobs for employees that are going to develop them, and becoming a socially responsible citizen within the community.
I'd say the unique thing about the Redeemer Business Program is that the classes have independent work and they also have group work. But it's not just that, because all universities have that. It's also teaching us how interconnected life is, and that the business concepts aren't just about finances, that any financial conversation has relational aspects to it and spiritual aspects to it. And even trying to understand a customer's needs and desires is not just about me making a profit, although I do need to make a profit. It's about caring for them in a meaningful and genuine way. And I can say for sure that here at Redeemer, the care of the professors and the nurturing of the classmates together to go beyond just looking for a degree, but to get an education for life, that's a huge bonus that Redeemer provides.
I think growing up in Africa and seeing some of the poorest places in the world has made me realize that there is the opportunity to make an impact. And I think that coming into Redeemer, I had the ideology that it was all about making money or getting financial gain. But I think with all the classes that I've been through, it's taught me that it's more than just making money. It's about impacting people in a real way and making a difference in someone's life. And I think when you make an impact in one person's life, it really does impact 1,000 other people as well.
There's two aspects that stand out for me with the Redeemer School of Business. It's the ethics that they have and the critical thinking, the strategic thinking at that point. The ethics, as Christians, we're called to be honoring in every approach that we take. And Redeemer really stresses that throughout multiple aspects of their education. It's not just about making money. It's not just about the bottom line. It's about bettering society as a whole, and that's what they really focus on. The strategic thinking aspect, it's always asking why. It's diving into it with that case study approach, with that group thinking approach. Redeemer really dives into that and causes you to ask those questions deeply. It's not just a black or white answer. It's diving in and finding solutions that are outside the box.
So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to graduate with a BBA. That's what sets the business program apart. It's not just learning the valuable hard skills that you'd learn in any business program, but also how you can tie in your own Christian worldview and apply those principles when you're out in the world in a business or creating your own business. And that's also what Redeemer teaches you as a student, to be strong in your beliefs and unwavering in them. And even when it comes to difficult decisions, like profit over people, knowing those values and where you stand can help you make those decisions.
A Bachelor of Business Administration is the customary degree for students who study business. So being able to graduate with those letters BBA after your name is going to remove obstacles that our students have experienced in the past. It will be immediately recognized that you have a reputable business degree. What this will mean is that our students will be even better positioned to transform the world through business for Christ. So tonight, as we are also challenged to transform yeah, you can clap for the stars in the show, especially our students and our alumni who came up big for us. Yeah. So tonight too, as we are challenged to transform the world for Christ through business, I'm going to turn the podium over to Dr. Sherol Chen, who's going to talk more specifically about the role of passion as a guiding compass. And Dr. Chen will take some questions after the presentation, so don't be shy. Dr. Chen has built and studied artificial intelligence for over a decade. Currently, she's a part of the Google research team. She's taught AI at Stanford University and around the world. In her spare time, she plays video games and saxophone. I don't know if we'll ask her which one she does best, but tonight we're really pleased to welcome you to this event. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Sherol. You make me feel better, Dr. Chen, than even an AI specialist needs a little adjustment to new technology. We did check this before. We are going to get this working. I think that was just a wait a minute. There we go.
Okay. I don't know what happened there. The microphone just wouldn't let me unmute all of a sudden. It doesn't look like it's not letting me talk and share my screen at the same time.
Okay. Zach, can you share Cheryl's slides from your backup then? And Sherol will just be the one to talk and give you a hi sign when she's ready to have you move on to the next one.
Yeah, I can totally flow with that. So as we're getting started, I will just tell you a little bit about myself. Thank you so much for the introduction. And it's definitely my pleasure to be here to talk about some of the corner of creation that I'm stewarding. And I have always had this lifelong passion for technology, but also understanding how technology makes us better humans. When I was little, I was very captivated by virtual worlds and video games, and I would sit on the school bus dreaming about the kinds of games that I would be working on someday if I could make my own. And back then, I remember people telling me that, this isn't a real profession. Like you can't, like people don't, become professional game makers. Games are for leisure. And it's just because they didn't, at the time, they didn't know who was making their games. So they were just kind of blindly consuming the different media that we saw out there, whether it was television, books, novels, movies, games. People didn't really, at least where in my community, they didn't really think about where things came from. But I had a God-given curiosity that really drove me to deeply investigate it to the point where I got a PhD. So let's go to the next slide and I'll outline my talk really quickly. So the next slide, you'll see that we'll be talking about kind of this idea of passion and how I was driven to where I was, and God kind of used passion as my compass. I followed my passion to be able to do the things that that both energized me, but also I could see true impact. And throughout this presentation, you'll see that I'm just very much drawn by fruit. I'm drawn to the fruit of the good things. And to me, that representation was never quite a kingdom framework. It was more of a metropolis framework. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll talk a little bit about history of purpose, which I've gleaned from just studying the history of intelligence for over a decade. And then I'll end with what really the lessons I've learned and how this like elevates your spiritual maturity and how you can help focus and prioritize in your life. So next slide just shows the types of stuff that I've been involved in. So I was working on my PhD, but in the midst of that, I also took on a role at YouTube, and we were doing algorithmic search results for different ways people could search YouTube. And we were looking at the music vertical and the kids vertical, and it was really my first taste into like the greater world of big tech. I eventually went to and look at enterprise solutions. So I was working with startups and businesses to kind of figure out how machine learning, and this is in the midst of machine learning boom, that how that incorporates and can be used. And it also went into the eventual move back into research, where I was working on machine learning for creativity and understanding the extension and how it augmented the human creation experience. Then I moved on. You may have heard of this product called Stadia, and it took me back to my gaming passion, which incredible testimonies of this journey that God had me on, which then leads me to the current team I'm working on, the Atrium team, where we're looking at ways in which we can immerse people in the process of how we design and how we use artificial intelligence, and that we're not like the concept that we call it human in the loop. That is, we're not just letting machines make decisions on our behalf, but we have a keen understanding and interpretability and explainability of what's going on. So if you go to the next slide, I'll show you a little bit about my background. So you'll see that like in 2016, on the next slide, this was like what my passion in games brought me. I just stayed in school pursuing the kind of work that really ignited my curiosity. I studied artificial intelligence for storytelling and narrative, and really I just wanted to understand the human condition. And then even before that, so earlier in school, I was working. I had an opportunity to write for this pop culture book called Halo and Philosophy, and I wrote the penultimate chapter on would Cortana pass the Turing test. And if you're not familiar with the Halo series, Cortana was actually a sci-fi AI mothership sort of presence that eventually Microsoft took to become their actual official like assistant AI. But back then it was just a fictional character in a game. And so I've had again, at least a decade of just a passion and an interest in understanding what it meant to be human and how we could be better at it. Next slide, please. In addition to all of that, I've always had this people always talk to me about work and faith. It's like a huge thing, right? Marketplace. And I feel like you are all like me. There's nothing I could say that would convince you all more of how important this is, right? This is like preaching to the choir. You all get this. If you go to the next slide, for me, it's like faith and work were never separate. The only time faith and work were separate was when I was in a church. Like I felt like the church just kind of were like, we're not here to talk about work. And it kind of created this artificial separation of the two. And then now we have to recombine them and call it work and faith and work, right? I've never personally ever felt that those things were distinct. And so and then I think we also saw the same thing in the marketplace. We didn't talk about politics, we didn't talk about religion. And then again, this artificial separation happened. So this was from an article in the New York Times that came out over the summer, where they talked about what does it mean, like as an AI researcher, to be of faith. So next slide. The big thing that really it culminates to is why am I here and how did I get here? And this all comes down to Like, there's no way I could have engineered this life journey. I could have even known and predicted that the things I was interested in would matter someday. Again, I was just drawn to the fruit. I tell people all the time, I live life like it was a video game and I followed God. Next slide, please. And so this sense of like purpose and belonging was always like true to who I am, and to the point where when I watch the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I'm like, I feel like I get it. I'm like, I feel like I have more in common with these characters than I do with like the people in the workplace sometimes, because I totally get that, the higher calling and purpose aspect of my career. And then the next slide, if you look at it, I also like just took a lot of joy in excellence. And it's not like in a way where it's like idolatry, where I feel like my value or my self-worth is defined by my performance, but that when things are done well, whether I was the main, person responsible or not, just seeing things done well brought me joy, and I felt the joy of the Lord in that. And so if you go to the next slide, like if I were to like describe myself in 3 words, it's always like jazz, Jesus, and video games. And so I like made this image once when I was giving another presentation, that I'm really into jazz, Jesus, and video games. To go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about Passion Talk. So one of the things that I noticed when I would be in church context was that we often would talk about theology and talk about the subject at hand. And when we go to retreats, it was no different than like, it didn't matter where you were in your career, retreats all felt the same as you were in like high school. Like it was just the same kind of format, quiet time, small groups, et cetera, et cetera. And people never really got to be their authentic selves. And I felt the same way in the workplace, actually. You didn't actually ever talk about the things that really, really matter to you. And so we spent 10 years, if you go to the next slide, looking at the passions of several people. We reviewed, in the 10 years that we've been doing Passion Talks, we've reviewed hundreds of passions. And this was just an attempt. This was in a conference setting. If you go to the next slide, and the reason why it's in a conference setting is because, as someone who's an academic studying artificial intelligence, this is one of the premier machine learning conferences. And this is what we did, was we had posters and we would get around and talk about ideas. Go to the next slide. As we talk about these ideas, we were just, people would crowd around each topic, and there would be just genuine enthusiasm, because when you bring together people of like-minded passion, there's just like fireworks that happen. So if you go to the next slide, we tried that in the church context. So this is Passion Talks, one of the years pre-pandemic, where we had people of faith create these idea posters, put them up, and then we had people like in a bazaar like fair kind of go through and discuss the ideas in the same ways that we saw in the academic research conferences. And so if you go to the next slide, we have this sense of like, I feel like it's like top down versus like bottom up. There's like the Metropolis model versus the kingdom model. And not that there's anything wrong with kingdom. If you go to the next slide, this Metropolis concept, of course, is a Greek term, and it is really modeled after the Greek city, the metropolis, right? And ecclesia is the word that you hear people use a lot in church context. And then there's this concept of church, which has this model of kingdom of God, for which I believe there is, Jesus is the king, and that Jesus has this kingdom. But maybe it's like, we seem to cling to certain traditions and practices. And so I really love, next slide, how you see C.S. Lewis describe it. And this is I'm not gonna spend too much time on this, but this is how C.S. Lewis talks about God being outside of time, right? Like, God does not know your action until you have done it. But then the moment at which you have done it is already now for him. So like, it's always the thing that you have done is always the present for God. Like, there is not something that you're doing that is outside of that. And I love how C.S. Lewis had this amazing way of capturing that complexity. Whereas, like, next slide, I worry sometimes that we're maybe like imitating the flaws of human examples. Like, we're kind of clinging to these models. And I feel like as entrepreneurs, as business-minded people, you probably see that. You're like, people are just doing this because it's the way it's been done. But it doesn't mean that like this is the way God intended it. And it never is. This is what being living means. If you're living, then you're growing, then you're maturing. If you're not maturing, you're not really alive. Like that, I've heard definitions of like biological definitions of life that things that are living change. So if you go to the next slide, we sometimes like, I feel like what the pandemic revealed to me was just like this sense of like lots of little kingdoms being built instead of this hybrid, multifaceted body of Christ metropolis, where we're able to, like, one of the key terms that when you read the history books is that like they offered citizenship. There was a belonging, there was a purpose, a representation that everyone had in this city, in this metropolis. And so, but when you have a lot of kingdoms, you don't have that same kind of, it's very much more of a inherited authority, and the territories are often ill-defined and outdated, because as the landscape changes, it's hard to maneuver around this kingdom authoritarian structure. Again, I believe Jesus is a king. I believe this is his kingdom here on earth that we are bringing about, but we're also not sitting outside of time like Jesus is and God is. So if you go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the metropolis of God. So next slide. To me, like I said earlier, like I think stage one, right? You acknowledge that there's this faith and work aspect, and I think you all understand this. And then I think of stage two as like people prioritizing, well, you know, my faith is the main reason I get up in the morning. My faith is what drives me. It's my number one thing. And like, and you give your first fruits to God. You're like, oh, like I'm just going to spend hours, you know, in prayer. I'm not going to make any decision unless God tells me to. And I think that's also great. But I also feel like there's like a third way, and it's like the all things way. Like all things are are for God's glory. Like the integrated view. And to me, like I think there's always like a place for all of these things. Sometimes it is priorities. Sometimes it's integration. Sometimes it's just an acknowledgement. If you go to the next slide, and I take this from like so when you think about like when you think about like I had a really humble friend once tell me, like, when you're like, if you're like scrubbing the windows or you're shining the shoes, like doing that for God's glory and really seeing God in that in those practices, no matter how big or small the task, no matter how much recognition or how little recognition, when you truly do it for God, the excellence comes from the joy of having done that for God. If you go to the next slide, another way to kind of live out the integration is we created this prayer journal where we would pray for, I don't know if you can see through the video, but like there's these different boxes. And the first one is like my projects. The second box on the if you go across is my meetings. Then I pray for my to-do list, then my coworkers, friends, and family. Then I talk about forgiveness. I talk about gratitude, praise, and affirmation. I pray for, I do some listening in the bottom left corner, like listening to God, listening prayers. And then I do a like current events type prayer at the end. And so this is I just wake up in the morning and I just fill out these boxes, and it helps just get me in the space. I call them my prayer receipts, so that like I often forget what I pray about, but then I can go back and say, oh, I don't need to worry about it. I have the receipt. It's right here. So next slide. You could and how this all kind of like culminates is that passion is the glue that I believe connects the faith and the work, right? Because you see, as you work and as you find excellence in any of the things, even if it feels toilsome, if you can find joy in excellence, even toilsome work, you can find passion in. Next slide. So if you go to the next slide, you have this like passion, faith, and work. I see it as this greatest commandment of like this has been like on my heart this past year, right? And we see it in multiple versions. You've probably heard and seen this, but basically love God with your heart, soul, strength, and all your mind. But you see heart, soul, and mind like multiple places. Go to the next slide. Here you'll see that I like the way I've always thought of it is, this is my framework, of course, is that, you know, loving God with your heart, it's like showing your passion for God, your passion for God's work, loving God with your soul, like your faith is like the eternal part of you, like that faith that you have in Jesus is what brings about the eternity and that relationship that you have with God. And then loving God with all your strength is what the works of your hands and your feet. So if you go to the next slide, I think about like, but what about your mind? And the example I use here is tracks, which I think are like, I feel like sometimes people just kind of hand it out because they're just like, oh, this is going to do some good. And the question I've always had is, well, why don't we measure how much good it's doing, right? And people look at me like, no, you just have to have faith that these tracks are going to do good things. And it's not that I don't believe that, but I feel like measuring it isn't going to make you less faithful. It's actually going to give you a platform for having even more faith. So if you go to the next slide, and it'll kind of like, I'll try. I know we lost a little bit of time at the beginning, but I just wanted to kind of talk about this concept of intelligence in our minds. So if you go to the next slide, in 1900s is where kind of this advent of understanding and measuring our own like ways of thinking and proficiency. So the first modern intelligence test happened. In 1927 was the century of self. There's this documentary that's on YouTube. It's incredible. And it talks about Freudian psychology and how marketing kind of took us from a needs-based society to a desires-based society. In 1971, the term attention economy gets coined, and we have the internet, and then social media takes off soon after that, right? You all of a sudden have all these entities, businesses, you have technologies competing for your attention, actually profiting off of how much attention they can draw from you. And now that you have you've moved on from needs to your own desires, it's almost like we could lose control of that and allow these other systems to define our desires. And so to me, I believe we're in a century of our spirituality where we have our compass and we know where we're headed, and we're not just going to let these systems market to us and dictate what we're gonna what we should care about. Next slide. So like if we look at it, right, there's these like levels of literacy that have changed. So you like in the 1800s, 90% of the world was illiterate, and so these understandings, of course, like you've got like again things that are living will evolve, will change. Next slide. And something that I've seen is that like in 1970, the problem solving was number 12 on the list of most valuable skills, and now it's number 2. This is from Forbes. This is from the Forbes study. Next slide. And then, so I'm going to end with this concept of like, what does it mean to grow? And like, of course, decaying is also changing, right? And so you want to be changing, but you don't want to be decaying. You want to be maturing. And in some ways, like maturity could be a sense of wearing away, but there's got to be like this sense of up and to the right, like you're moving towards the right sort of fruit. And I'm somebody that's very drawn to fruit at a data-driven company, at a company that's trying to understand information. To me, like the Lord said, like good trees bear good fruit, a good tree can't bear bad fruit. And so it was always very empirical, observable. And so we've been given the tools to understand this. So next slide. When I think about collaboration, I think about this concept of like stone soup, this story of how groups of people organically come together for a common goal. Next slide. And how you draw these people is from your breadth of interest. You have what's energizing and what's de-energizing. And then if you go to the next slide, there's actually another axis that I drew in, and it's the maturity axis. So it's not just if you only do what energizes you, sometimes that could also go in a wrong direction. So you need like more than just your passion as your compass. So you go to the next slide. This is how I look at it. I look at it as level 1, level 2, and level 3. So you have what energizes you, right? You have your feelings, your understanding, and your excellence. And I think that we're always at different various aspects of that. We're always sometimes we're just wanting to feel better. Sometimes we want to learn something. Sometimes we want to do things well. So if you go to the next slide, I see motivations of like when you're chasing feelings, it's often all about you. It's more self-centered. When you're chasing understanding, there's like a curiosity that's fueling you. And then when you're chasing like higher level projects, and this is like, I'm someone who likes to do everything. Like my filter had to become better and better over these years as these things became more taxing. So measurable impact became kind of like a guiding, and I'm still learning it. Like I'm still sometimes caught in vanity and curiosity, right? I still just want to learn, but the true hallmark is like really being able to know what the good fruit you're looking for is. And then the next slide. And then these are the characteristics. So we have like for me, I like still struggle with insecurity. I still struggle with immaturity. I still struggle with wanting to feel self-important, which I think stems from my own insecurities, which then drives these kind of projects and these things that I want to do to kind of edify that. But I'm also like very much like wanting to fact find and be experiential and learn. So I'm also very much like heavily driven by curiosity. And then what I'm moving towards and what I would be more like is more having clear objectives, being goal focused. And sometimes I like shy away from that because I have like imposter syndrome. Like I think I can't do it. But to me, that's like a hallmark again. Next slide. So anyways, the summary of this talk is basically don't be basic. And I've always like, again, being basic to me means just kind of clinging to tradition for tradition's sake, doing what you see everyone else doing. And I think that, again, we can do better. We can be curious. We can be bold. We can define goals. And we can be the ones that are seeing these things through to the end with clearly articulated impact. Last slide. Thank you very much. There's my Twitter, there's my newsletter, and it was really a pleasure to meet and talk to all of you today.
Thank you, Sherol. Okay, we did lose a little bit of time at the beginning, but I think we still have a couple minutes if there are burning questions in there. Otherwise, we may have a couple of questions yet after the alumni talk as well. I thought only professors had imposter syndrome. Maybe you students don't always know what you think we don't have it, you know, that you think you have imposter syndrome. Somebody's going to figure out that you don't really know what you're talking about. Your professors go into every class feeling that way. Somebody's going to discover that I don't really know what I'm talking about here. So it's always I don't know whether it's reassuring or at least there's some comfort in taking that even very talented people still have those feelings. Maybe that's like an athlete that keeps you on your game. So are there questions for Sherol? You can chat them in, you can raise your virtual hand, you can raise your physical hand, and I'll try to do a scan. Except those of you that turned off your camera. I hope you're still there. Yeah, Dr. Asatrian.
To save the date? No. Speaking of, thank you very much. It's very insightful and inspirational. And you mentioned the spirit of excellence, the spirit of the fruit. And I wonder, and since you brought up the imposter syndrome as well, is that how have you reconciled in your own professional and faith walk this tension between the striving for excellence in all we do, with all the mind, with all the strength and everything else, and the inhibitions that we as human beings, with all our weaknesses and so on, are experiencing at times, and some of us more often than others, of not good enough, not strong enough, not excellent enough. Where do you find that peace that transcends all understanding in the high demanding career like yours, or in others? You brought up the example of shoe polisher. Where do we find that peace where the excellence they call the joy of excellence, and then the times where we're not feeling that the excellence is present? How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think I often, first thing that comes to mind is that for me, performance is also an escape. It was like me trying to escape trauma, me trying to use success as a means of getting away from something else to something better. And I think that in that there's a healing process that when we get to that higher ground, you're actually given the mental space and the emotional space for God to go in and heal those areas. So I believe that there's an aspect of healing, but the other aspect is like really just knowing that God was with me the entire time. I would say that like, in the highs and the lows that like God, the question that people often ask themselves is like, God, were you disappointed in my work? Were you disappointed in me? And oftentimes it's our own voice that's telling us that there's disappointment, whereas God, like taking joy, like that's what I'm trying to reincorporate is what the locusts have eaten, right? Like the joy has been eaten in a lot of this, the striving and the performance, and reclaiming that of just like as I'm imagining right now, like, a dad playing baseball with his son or daughter, and they're not very coordinated maybe, but that there's just so much joy that God takes in that. And so I might be not the most, I might not have gone to the top machine learning school to be like studying this high level mathematics to enable me to be the quickest and most astute at artificial intelligence as it is today. But I feel the joy of God being with me as I learn, and an understanding of like how we all come from somewhere different, have something different and special and unique to offer.
Professor Chow.
Hi, thanks, Dr. Chen. That was awesome. You gave us a lot to think about. I was wondering about, how I saw the problem solving from 1970 go up to 2009 to like number 2. And then also combine that with my question of like, how do you then see the church coming together with creativity and passion and maybe problem solving?
Yeah, I see it as like in the same way we talk about like we can grow ourselves physically, like we could become like, oh gosh, I have asthma, but I need to start running again, right? Like I need to get back into shape. We talk about growing our emotional maturity, like maybe we're avoidant and we don't like tough conversations and we go out and we do that. I think now we're also growing our spiritual maturity, and part of that is like exercising our faith that God has the answers, our faith that like taking these like, again, like maybe I go running 5 minutes a day and I add a minute every day, right? Taking like progressively more steps of faith and learning and growing our intimacy with God in this way. And what that does is that's going to help bring us an insight of the trends that are coming. We have the faith. James it says, God gives wisdom to all without finding fault. But if you have to both not just ask, but also believe that you're going to receive it, or else you're not going to get anything. You're going to be like a wave tossed by the wind. And so I think that faith is honestly a huge component, like believing that these ideas come from heaven and that God already knows what's to come. And sometimes it's just like we don't see the world necessarily living in that way, and it's hard for us to go against that grain again. So just like small steps that like if you have faith asthma, then eventually you can kind of overcome that. And for me, it's like, again, like when you look back, you can't, like, I think many of us on this call probably couldn't have planned out we would be where we are today when we look back, right? And just believing that, like putting that forward, projecting that forward of like, where could that possibly take you next? And then trusting in God and all of that.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on to the alumni. Maybe there'll be time for a couple more questions at the end. And I'd like to just hear from a few of our alumni about what their journey has been like and how Redeemer helped shape their passions, maybe how those passions have grown and matured over the years. And we're going to start with Kathleen Loney, who is from the class of 2011.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susan. Dr. Chen, that is a very tough act to follow, but I appreciate your presentation very much. It's a pleasure to be with everyone this evening. My name's Kathleen Loney, as Susan mentioned. I'm a senior marketing manager at a pharmaceutical company. It's an interesting time to be in pharma right now, lots going on, but it's really exciting. When I was asked to do this and talk about passion, I thought it's a little bit like asking the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And truthfully, I don't know if I'm there yet. And I'll be honest, when I left high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had some interest in business, potentially law school, and I entered Redeemer thinking I'd be an English major with a music minor. I very quickly in my first intro to business course realized that's probably more up my alley. And so I switched over to the business program and really thought, at any rate, I'll learn some skills here that I can apply in whichever career path I end up in. And following that, I entered the co-op program. And that's truly where I had my first exposure to the pharmaceutical industry, medical devices. And that's where I think my passion started to grow. So really not by choice, but that's just what happened, and the position that I was able to get. And I have had the immense pleasure and honor of meeting many, many patients across the country and around the world, their families and caregivers, and the doctors who treat them. And it is truly humbling to work on products that save lives and extend life for people who are very, very sick. And so for me, I'm very proud to be in this industry. I'm proud to be an alumni from Redeemer in this industry. And I think it's a place where we need Christians, to be honest. When I think about my time at Redeemer, I'm so grateful for the professors I had, not only in the business program, and they are all exceptional, but outside of the business program, I took some other courses. One course I always talk about is public speaking. I think communication and the art of influence through speech and presentation is so critical, no matter what career you're in, whether it's business or any other industry. It's something that you cannot practice enough and has a huge impact on the audience that you're trying to reach. So to me, I think, I always encourage people work on communication because it is such a valuable skill. Another area I'm passionate about, and I do recognize some familiar faces here, is women in business and women in leadership. I truly, truly believe that we will make progress in this area. And I think as women and men of faith, it is on each and every one of us to be a part of that progress. And whether that's as a faculty member, as a mentor, as an employer, as a peer, to your female colleagues and fellow students, it's so important that we continue to encourage women in leadership and applying for roles that, maybe you don't have all the qualifications, but you go for it. And we know that as a workplace and as a society and an economy, we are better for it. And lastly, I would say your passion does not need to be clearly defined. I have many days where I think, am I in the right industry? Should I totally do something different? Should I go back to school? I have all these thoughts all the time. And I think that's completely normal and it's human nature. And imposter syndrome is very real. And that's okay. I think what keeps me grounded in all of that is I try to do my very best, which I don't do very well many, many days, to be a reflection of Christ in the workplace with the people that I am constantly working with or serving, whether it's patients or doctors, just day in and day out in every situation. And whether that's, just showing compassion and empathy and care towards people, it's something that I think is truly important, no matter what your role is.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. So we'll go next to you, Caleb Blackwell, from class of 2015.
Hello, everybody. My name's Caleb. Right now, since I graduated, I've had about a 7-year-long career in the banking industry, which has taken me through a bunch of neat stuff. I like to open this up by saying that I have a passion for both people and loans. And I figured that nobody here would want to talk about my passion for loans. So I think I'll stick to my passion for people, and we'll keep it at that. I guess my overarching thing that I want to communicate is the power of Redeemer's, I think, business degree is. Sherol hit the nail on the head. Sometimes you'll work for a company, you'll work for a corporation that doesn't allow you to openly discuss faith at work because it's against corporate policy. That's a real thing that's out there. It might be politics, no religion, no nothing like that. So your religion is something that has to be very much lived instead of spoken. It's a core fundamental, and that's what you in Redeemer's business degree. That's what I learned, is how to live that Christian business model, that Christian business mindset, which has helped me through doing business in a secular world. In my career, I've held pretty much 2 main jobs. One is where I counseled individuals on their own financial wellness. I was everybody's bank guy. If you walk into a bank, there's a guy in an office somewhere. That was me. That was me for about five years or so. And over that period in time, I saw roughly 20 people a week, discussed with them their finances. And I was stunned by the number of opportunities I had to speak a good word to those people that had no clue what they were doing, potentially in the middle of making a gigantic financial mistake. And you're really shown that having a strong moral foundation works out for more ways than just, checking a box, being your religion. It helps in life, and it helps you speak into other people's lives as well. It's a key piece. And I still carry it now. So I don't work in personal financial services anymore. I've moved into business lending. So I work with business owners on managing their banking, which is kind of a neat transition. But again, it still affords me the opportunities to talk to people face to face, help them with their issues, and occasionally you do get to put in that that good word into their life. Coming from a foundation of business from a moral perspective, from that strong Christian ethics that we carry with us, is crucial as well, and it is a differentiator. It's a big difference when you are stacked up against your let's say non-believing peers. It's a huge differentiator when you consistently do the right thing when somebody else may not do the right thing, even if it's small stuff. It is a consistent differentiator, and I'm just really pleased to have had that going into the workplace. You never really truly appreciate what you are learning in the context you're learning it in until you actually reflect on it after a couple of years. You go, that's the value that I saw. So that was just a couple of things from me on kind of the value of the education at Redeemer there.
Thank you, Caleb. We'll go next to Rachel, who's one of the first 12 graduates to receive a BBA degree from Redeemer.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Rachel. As mentioned, I'm a very, very new alumni, so just starting into my career. And as Professor Van Wielden mentioned, I just graduated and got the honor of getting the BBA degree this past spring. So I got an honors degree in accounting. And right now I'm currently working in public accounting at the KPMG Hamilton office in their audit group and working towards my CPA designation. So as a new grad kind of entering this world in the fall, I'm passionate about building community and being able to lead others. And after just taking all that education, being able to bring some new and different perspectives into the workplace and shine God's light in that. I know I'm very new into it, but the hope is to take what I learned and bring that in. So I'll kind of speak as to what Redeemer and how it's prepared me in finding my passion. As Professor Boostel and Van Wielden both already know, I kind of had a different start to my time at Redeemer. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go the accounting route. I really wasn't sure about my passion, but I decided to take the co-op route at Redeemer. And before my first co-op term, I was going to take a different career path and was unsure if accounting was for me. However, the unique experience at Redeemer is that you have your profs and they know you and they're able to get to know you. And so I was able to discuss my decisions and pray with them about what to do. And ultimately, for my first co-op term, I chose to try out accounting, see what I like. And once I began working, it really clicked for me. And I could see how the things that I had learned in class, and not even just in accounting and like leadership and strategy and all those other courses, how that was able to transfer into my co-op terms and really get to see how my learning turned into that. And because I had that background, that through that, I was kind of able to see that I was passionate about it and I did actually start to enjoy that work. So I'm very thankful for those conversations and those decisions and kind of what it's allowed me to do. Because as of now, I've continued on to the accounting route. So with Redeemer's unique opportunities in their co-op programs for the business students, I was able to have that chance to kind of test that out before I graduated. So that was really awesome. And I got to learn lots through that. So I take with me from Redeemer the things I learned from my profs outside of the classroom, all the unique networking opportunities that were allowed me to bring me where I am, and who knows where that will bring in the future. But most importantly, the unique Christian perspective that the professors were able to provide, and lean into prayer when discerning what my passion is and how I can live that with God's calling in my life. So overall, although I'm new to the post-grad life, I'm confident that thanks to my experiences at Redeemer, I feel prepared for the opportunities that are to come, and how I'm able to use my passion in the future.
Thank you, Rachel. It's good to know that passion evolves, and yours will no doubt continue to evolve as well. Let's hear next from Robin Moybrook.
Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Moybrook. I'm a director of corporate finance with Bank of Montreal. So similar to Caleb, I'm very passionate about loans, and we can maybe talk about that offline. But I've been in this industry since I graduated. Actually, before I had the opportunity to work full-time during my studies at Redeemer in an account management role at a different financial institution. And I'll give the answer that like you're not supposed to, in terms of why I took that role, was financial stability and a good job out of university. And that was really important for me. And it sort of took a couple years in the job for me to figure out, you know, if I was passionate about it, whether I liked it, and what the opportunities were for me. And I think that's, you know, maybe a different perspective, but for me, that was always really important. Was I knew that I liked the job, and I knew that I was pretty good at it, but it took me a few years to determine if that was actually my passion, because it didn't really line up necessarily with what I thought I was going to be doing. I knew I was passionate about meeting people and learning about people and helping people, but it didn't line up quite as linearly as I thought it was going to, because giving people money didn't feel like helping as much as maybe being a doctor, which is what my initial game plan was. So I think for me, a big part of passion has been about doing a regular reevaluation of what I'm doing and whether or not there's still aspects that I am passionate about, and, you know, how to work that into my current role, and whether or not I'm still doing the things that I initially started and what that motivation is for. And then, you know, maybe in a you know, not as important route, but, you know, thinking about the things outside of the main career that I'm really passionate about. I love good food. I love sports. I thought at one point my career was going to orient me specifically around those items. And I found a way in my job to, you know, incorporate that through client interactions, business networking, those sort of functions. So I think also, especially in, you know, times like COVID, or, you know, when you go through more challenging aspects in your career, to remember what those like small little joys and passions that you have, whether that's connecting with, you know, different, whether it's alumni, friends, family, specific clients, and figuring out a way to make that a regular part of your day. That's always been a really important way for me to sort of orient it. So having a degree from Redeemer, I mean, I can't speak enough about the co-op program. I wouldn't be where I was or where I am without it. So that's always been very important to me, and just being able to grow from there. I've always been very grateful for that opportunity.
Thank you, Robin. And we're going to end off with a star of stage and screen, at least the recent star, Ian Cubit.
Hi, everybody. I graduated in 2004, and I'm excited to be with you tonight. I got married in 2003 to one of the music students at Redeemer, and we've been married for 18 years, now 4 children. I'd say the time at Redeemer shaped me in a few ways. One is it's clarified for me what some of my convictions are. And one of my convictions is that I'm in full-time Christian ministry. And one of my pet peeves is when people have this pyramid of who's most pleasing to God. And at the top of it, maybe is a missionary to Africa or Asia. And then we got doctors, and then nurses, and then lawyers. Actually, lawyers are further down the list. But anyway, there's that kind of stereotypical pyramid, and that always felt untrue to me. And studying at Redeemer really helped me to get language and perspective and conviction around that, to feel that I can absolutely, like, God's calling me into business. That's where obedience requires me to go. And going to one of those other things is great for another person who's called to that, and maybe great for me if God does call me to one of those things in the future. But for the time being, business is my call. In terms of convictions, one of the things that really stands out in my memory is a couple years into my career, I took a letter that I had drafted to one of the partners in the accounting firm that I worked for. And the standard at the time was, the salutation was, "Dear Sir" or "Madame." And that was what we were supposed to write. So he said, "Everything looks good except scrap the Madame. I want you to write 'Dear Sirs.'" And I said, "If you want that change, you'll need to make the change yourself," which was not the most popular thing for like a fairly junior person to say to an experienced partner. And he there was a bit of silence, and then he said, "Just leave it as it is." And that stands out for me. And apparently word got around the office that I'd ruffled some feathers about that. But I think that speaks to the strength of the convictions that Redeemer helped me to build. And I think one of the things that Redeemer helped to shape me and how it helped to transform me was the ability to see the big picture and to evaluate simultaneous and competing priorities. And I know when I went through my chartered accounting exams, it was essential to be able to identify what were the significant issues, what were the secondary issues, and what was just distraction that was included for no reason other than to make things complicated. And the studying I did at Redeemer helped me with that. And another thing that Redeemer shaped me and helped to transform me is it helped me to be open, to be willing to innovate to achieve a desired goal. And so in order to innovate to achieve a desired goal kind of implies that there is a desired goal. And so that's been really helpful to be able to innovate. And one thing that stands out for me is that most organizations and systems are not anti-innovation, but they do lack any reward system or incentives to create an environment that nurtures innovation. And then there's one other thing I wanted to talk about. Oh, and that is Redeemer really helps me to have heart-level conversations with people, especially in the dorms, especially in the teaming that I did with other people on teams. And I found in my work, especially my work in environments that are not pro-faith, I've been able to have hundreds of heart-level conversations with people, and to the extent that I'm actually able to give them a book or an audio book or something that nurtures them at the point where they're at in life, regardless of where they're at on the spiritual continuum. And that's one of the real bonuses that the Redeemer education provided me, is having that awareness that a heart level conversation is different than a head level conversation, and the courage to engage in having heart level conversations with people.
Thank you, Ian. I do want to honor the time commitment. We said this would be an hour, and we're just at that hour now. So I'll just make a few closing remarks. If you're a student or prospective student attending this event and you have a question for one of these alumni, and you can send a question to me, and we'll make sure that that gets passed along. So thank you for joining us for the launch tonight. If you're thinking also about attending Redeemer and you'd like to talk to a faculty member, talk to your admissions counselor. They'll put you in touch with one of us. Redeemer's business program has graduated hundreds of alumni, just like the ones that you've met tonight. And by the grace of God, those alumni have accomplished marvelous things. They've been faithful co-workers in God's redemptive process. And as we look to the future of the School of Business, the new BBA degrees will open even more degrees as our graduates continue to transform the world for Christ through business. And for that, we give all glory and praise to God. Thank you very much for coming out this evening. Hope that I trust that there was something that spoke to you in the course of this evening. Special thanks to you, Sherol, as well, for your time tonight. So let's give Sherol and the alumni as well a round of applause. So with that, we'll sign off. Thank you, everyone.